We are in the second week of a series of messages called Mighty Men. And when we talk about mighty men, there are a variety of different ones found in the scriptures. Last week we talked about Joshua being a mighty man of God. And this week we're looking at one of his friends, Caleb, as being a mighty man of God as well. And so I'm going to ask you, if you would please, to turn to the book of Numbers in your Bible. In fact, if you're looking there, Numbers 13 is on page 227. And the part that we'll be looking at today is actually more on page 228. And then Joshua chapter 14, verses 6 through 14. And so that is page 353. So anyway, if you'll turn to those passages and hold those in readiness, you can find those in the Bible and the chair in front of you. Or if you have your own Bible with you, that's Old Testament, both Numbers 13 and Joshua 14. T.E. Lawrence once said, "All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream at night in the dusty recesses of their minds awake to the day to find it was all vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for the many act out of their dreams with open eyes to make it possible." We all dream at night. We may not remember those dreams, but still we dream sometime or another during the night. But when you have a dream that was in the night, you wake up in the morning and realize that was just something that was occupying my mind during those hours. But if you have a dream that begins to occur in your heart and in your mind, and is something you can't get rid of, it's something that you will be able to pursue and do something about. And if God is in that, you're going to find some really great things happening for that. Now, we know that everything we have in life basically has been connected somewhere or another to a dream that someone had. For example, chances are this morning you have used an iPhone that was first conceived in the mind of Steve Jobs. You may have used a Mac computer. That was something that he came up with also. This morning we have electric lights in here. Thomas Edison worked a long time to find out what it was that would work to cause electric lights to burn for a period of time. And we also know that we've probably listened to some music today that was recorded. And what was recorded, we know that that precursor to that took place when Edison developed the phonograph. It may have been a Henry Ford dreaming about people making cars while working in an assembly line that has changed the course of American manufacturing. It may have been a Walt Disney dreaming about a talking mouse and a place called the happiest place on earth. It may have been a Dwight D. Eisenhower who was dreaming about an Allied defeat of Nazi forces in Europe on D-Day. All of those and scores of others have happened because someone had a dream. Someone had a vision for what it was that they wanted to accomplish. In 1924, a guy named Gutzon Borglum was at the Black Hills in South Dakota. As he looked over a certain range of mountains, and especially at Mount Rushmore, he said these words, "American history shall march along that skyline." In 1927, Borglum began sculpting the images of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt on the granite face of the 6,000-foot-high Mount Rushmore. Most of the sculpting was done by people who were professional miners at Borglum's direction. Working with jackhammers and dynamite, they were able to blast away and knock away 400,000 tons of outer rock. When Borglum died in March of 1941, the project did not die. It did not stop. His son Lincoln then began to pick up where he left off and finished that project in October of that year. And today, we can either drive to South Dakota and see those images still there on Mount Rushmore, or we can see pictures of it and be impressed by the fact that someone had a dream for that, and that dream became a reality. That dream became a reality. Today it inspires everyone who's able to see it. My friend Mark Atterbury says, "The best dream is the one that finds you rather than the one that you have to find." I like that. Let me repeat that for you. The best dream is the one that finds you rather than the one you have to find. Well, Caleb in the scriptures had a dream that found him. Of course, he was involved in finding it too. But it was a dream that seemed to just never go away for him. It was a dream that said, I know what I want to accomplish. And with God's help, I'll be able to do that. Now, last week we looked at Joshua as being our first mighty man. We remember that as Israel was coming out of Egypt after 400 years of slavery, that both Joshua and Moses and all the people had been a part of the slavery of Egypt. It was a very terrible time in the history of Israel. Yet we also know that God was leading the people out through a series of plagues that occurred in Egypt, and the last one propelled them out of there, and they were going towards the promised land. They hit the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's army was after them, and we all know the story of how Moses raised the rod of God and the waters parted. Israel was able to go across that stretch on dry land, and then those same waters came across the Egyptian army and drowned them. We know that God led the people with a cloud during the daytime and a pillar of fire at night. We know that there were people who knew in that group that they were headed towards the promised land, that Moses was leading them there. And Joshua became his assistant, his military general, somebody who eventually was taking over for Moses in the future. We know also that as they got closer, that Moses said, I want to send some spies into the land. And so he got all the representatives together from the 12 tribes and said, select one person from your tribe who will be your representative, who will go into the promised land and spy it out. And so each tribe sent a person. There were 12 men altogether who had the enthusiastic opportunity to go into this land they'd been hearing about and to explore it. While they were there for 40 days. And while they were there for 40 days, they found all kinds of wonderful things. It truly was a land flowing with milk and honey. They came back with this huge cluster of grapes that had to be carried on a pole. They brought back pomegranates and figs. They brought back a glowing report of what the land looked like. They also brought back a report that was not very glowing about who lived there. They said that there were giants there. There were sons of Anak there, who was a giant. And because of that, they felt as if they were grasshoppers compared to those individuals who were there. Now, there were two of those spies, Joshua and Caleb, who we're looking at today, who said, yes, that is true. They are big, but with God's help, we can go in and we can take the land. Let's not retreat. We can do it. But you know how negative news is. Negative news is influential, isn't it? Has the ability to take the wind out of the best plans that are out there. And so negative news began to spread throughout the camp of the Israelites, and they determined that they wanted to go back to Egypt. They said, we need a new leader. We don't think we can take on those giants. We got to go back to Egypt. We had it so much better back there. But Caleb speaks up, and this is what he says. We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And Joshua sided with him, saying that God was on their side. Now, Israel still listened to the negative report, and they had to wander for 1 year for every day that they were in that promised land spying it out. They were there for 40 days. They had to wander for 40 years before they ever got the opportunity to go in. We know last week that they did get to go in. They crossed the Jordan River. They took down Jericho by walking around it with God's ability working for them. We know that all that took place. And we also know that Caleb, while he was in that promised land originally, had a dream that began to germinate in his life. That dream was he saw some property, he saw some land around Mount Hebron, and he said, someday I want that for myself. Someday that's where I'm going to build a house. Someday that's where I'm going to live. Someday that's where my family will be. And he never could get that dream out of his mind. He approached Joshua after they were now already in the promised land. And he said this. He said, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years, since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Amalekites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said. And then it says this, that Joshua blessed Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. You know, Caleb's discovery of his dream wasn't something that occurred until he was 40 years of age. Isn't that something else to think about that? Man, oh man. He apparently discovered this dream, his dream, once he saw that hill country there in Hebron. He can imagine what it would be like, where he would place the house, where the garage for his chariot would be. He was thinking about all these kinds of things, about how nice it would be to be in this particular area. And I want you to know something, that dream began for him when he was doing something. The dream began when he was serving God. You ever think about that? The dream began to happen for him when he was serving God. You know, I didn't have the dream of going into ministry early in life. I didn't thought about that. But what I did do is I got into this band, and we started playing in different places, conferences, conventions, camps, colleges, all over the place. And as I did that more in this band, God began to work in that. I began to see different ministers, youth ministers, senior ministers, different events that began to tug on my heart, calling me, saying, you need to serve God in some way or another. Did I know it was going to be a preaching ministry? No, I didn't at that time. But did I know I wanted to serve God? Yes. And the reason that I came to that knowledge is because I was already serving God. I was already involved in serving in some way or another when the dream began to germinate. And then I left Purdue University to travel to Lincoln Christian College in Lincoln, Illinois, to pursue a Christian education in ministry. God was at work in germinating that dream inside me when I was serving him. And that same process, I believe, is consistent with what the scriptures tell us. That if you have a dream, and it's a godly dream, it's oftentimes that you will be already serving God in some way or another when that dream begins to germinate and when it begins to become active in your life as well. When you reach the fulfillment of that dream, then chances are you will be serving God in some way or another. I like the way that Mark Batterson says it. Faith is not logical, but it's not illogical either. Faith is theological. It doesn't ignore reality. It just adds God into the equation. We often ask young people what they want to do when they grow up. We say, hey, what are you thinking about? Where are you going to go to college? What would you like to do when you get out of school? What's your career idea? What's your plan in that regard? You know what? It's great to ask that question because we know that oftentimes young people have some sort of idea what they want to do. Now, their idea when they're a third grader may not come true. I mean, they might want to be a fireman, and that's just not going to happen, or they want to be a nurse, and that may or may not happen. But as they get a little older, they begin to discover maybe how God has wired them. And they begin to see that God has got this plan for their life and has kind of given them some specific talents and abilities to begin to use in that direction. And so it's natural for us to ask a young person, what do you want to do when you grow up, if we want to say it that way? At the same time, we oftentimes kind of miss out on another area. It's just as important, I believe, to ask a person with more years in life what they want to do for the rest of their life. What they want to do for the rest of their life. I mean, a dream may be germinated in a young person's mind, but it may not be completely reached into reality until a few years have passed by. It's funny how that works sometimes. That's what was happening in Caleb's life, wasn't it? Younger man, boom, it doesn't become a reality until he's 85 years of age. Isn't that something? You know, there was a woman named Agnes who felt a call into ministry when she was a teenager. She did her ministerial training in two very diverse places. One of them was Ireland. One of them was in India. And one day she approached her superiors with a godly ordained passion. She said, I have 3 pennies and a dream from God to build an orphanage. Her superior said, "You can't build an orphanage with 3 pennies. With 3 pennies, you can't do anything." And Agnes smiled and she said, "I know, but with God and 3 pennies, I can do anything." And for 50 years, Agnes worked among the poor in Calcutta, India. And in 1979, the woman we know better as Mother Teresa won the Nobel Peace Prize. She had a dream as a teenager that bore fruit. She became world famous for her serving God by serving others. Caleb's dream was planted when he was 40. It began to be fulfilled when he was 85. Harriet Doerr's outlook on aging was interesting. She said, "One of the best things about aging is being able to watch imagination overtake memory." See, we oftentimes kind of, as we get older, think about our memories, don't we? We think about, what we used to do. We think about the things we accomplished before. We think about the things maybe we missed out on. The what ifs. What if I hadn't done this? Or what if I did do that? Would life have been different? And so oftentimes people look back and they just kind of spend time ruminating about the past. But in reality, God may very well have something more for us, depending, or no matter what our age is. If we look back at Acts chapter 2, that's the day of Pentecost. That's the day when the Holy Spirit came into the world and the church was begun. And on that day, as Peter, the apostle, stood up to preach to the group that was there, lots and lots of people, thousands of people, there were a number of people who were hearing the apostles speaking in tongues, languages that they didn't know, but languages that the people in the crowd would recognize. And it drew them. And as Peter stood up to preach, he said, "What you are seeing is a fulfillment of a prophecy by the prophet Joel." He says in this prophecy, "I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions." Now, we typically don't think of young men and women, or sons and daughters, prophesying, do we? And yet, because of God's ability, God's Spirit, that could happen. Old men will dream dreams. It doesn't say old men will just look back and ruminate about the past. It says that old men will have a vision for the future. Old men will still be thinking about what God might do in their life for the future. And it says, "And your young men will see visions." So in other words, there's no restriction on when God may give you a dream, and God may work in your life to begin to fulfill that dream. That is so important for us to recognize. We oftentimes think our dreams have died, they've passed us by, we don't have the opportunity to accomplish them, to realize them anymore. But God may be saying to you, "Listen, stick tight with me, because your dream has not completely died yet. In fact, it can be revived, and I can show you how to do that. And I will bring this joy into your life." My dad is 92 years of age. Last year, he was only 91, okay, just to let you know on that, okay? But he told me last year that he had this dream. He had this vision for something he wanted to do. Frank knows Eli Lilly. My dad used to work for Eli Lilly for about 40 years. He was a research scientist for them. He got several patents for them. He developed certain medicines for them. And he said, when I was a younger man, I had this dream for being able to create this medicine that would enable something with the brain to receive this medicine more easily, to be absorbed through the lining of the brain. Said I never accomplished that, but I would still like to do that. I'm going to begin working on that. I'm thinking, "Dad, you're 91 years old. You're 92 years old," because he mentioned it not all that long ago again. But that is a person who has a dream. He remembers the past, but he is not resting on his laurels for the past. He's saying, "I still want to accomplish. I still believe that God has something for me to do." And I admire that so much about him. So there's not one age group that has this market on dreams for the future. God doesn't seem to limit our dreams to any one particular group. His Holy Spirit can work on a boy, on a girl, on a young man, on a middle-aged man, woman, on an older person. His Spirit is not restricted by our age. Now, do you have a dream? What would you like to accomplish? My question is, what has kept you from pursuing that dream? What is it that has gotten in the way between you and the fulfillment of that dream? What is it? Has it been time? Has it been money? Has it been other obligations? Has it been sons of Anak who are monsters or giants in front of you in some way or another that need to be overcome? What is it that has been keeping you from being able to begin to pursue your dream? You know, a few years ago at the Catalyst Conference, Mark Batterson made this significant statement. He said, never put a comma where God puts a period, but never put a period where God puts a comma. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Caleb experienced a 40-year comma in his life. That means his dream was put on hold for a while, but his dream was still viable. There were some conditions, though, that he had to meet, some things that apply to him and to us so that the dream would become a reality. And if you're following along today and you have your outline out, it's on the back of your bulletin, you can fill in these words. Caleb's dream was in God's will. Caleb's dream was in God's will. When your dream lines up with God's will, you know that it's going to succeed. But he won't do it all for you. You have to also be involved in that dream as well. Caleb knew that God had promised Abraham hundreds of years before that his relatives would inherit that land. That gave him an element of confidence for sure. But there was something else as well. He had the confidence, but he also had God's favor in his life. It says here that God says, but my servant Caleb is different from the others. He's remained loyal to me, and I will bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will receive their full share of that land. If God is going to bless your dream, you have to be loyal to him. He loves everybody. John 3:16 tells us that for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. We know that's true. We know that he loves everybody. But God shows special favor for those who belong to him. And that's important that we recognize that. Caleb had received special favor from God. If you are going to pursue this dream that you have, if your dream is going to be successful, you need to make sure it is in God's will for you. And then make sure that you are living in God's will yourself. We've all known people who said, I got this dream of something I want to do, but their life did not match up with what God was wanting them to do for their own personal life. And so God is saying, listen, make sure your life is lined up with what my word has to say. You can't ignore what it says and receive my blessing. It doesn't matter how passionate you are about it or how relentlessly you're willing to pursue it. If God isn't in it, or if he opposes it, if it's against Scripture, it isn't going to happen. But if your dream is a God-honoring dream and you sense that he is opening up the doors for your dream to happen, then you are experiencing his approval. And I would think that God would say to you and me, dream big. Dream big. You know, Paul wrote some words in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20 that I just think are so fantastic. He says, he, meaning God, is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. Isn't that something else? He's able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. You can't measure how much more God can do than we can ask or imagine. But what I find for my own life sometimes, and you probably have found it true for you too, that we ask such small things, that we don't ask for bigger things. For some reason or other, our faith needs to get stretched so that we might see a bigger picture, that we might have a greater vision for what God has for us personally and even for this church as well. That we might say, God, what is it that you want to accomplish in us? God blesses our dream, and if he does that, we will know it's from him. I hope that would be said that all of us are the type of people that God favors and that he blesses their dreams. Secondly, Caleb's dream fit with his talents. Joshua succeeded Moses as that next leader, as I shared. He was somebody who was strategic. He was somebody who had learned from Moses. He was somebody who was there when Moses was at the tent of meeting with God. He was somebody who had waited at the bottom of the mountain after Moses came back down with the 10 Commandments. I mean, he was close to Moses, and he was definitely a general, a field general. He was somebody who knew how to take the people of Israel into the promised land. On the other hand, Caleb was a different type of individual than Joshua. He wasn't as inclined to strategy or leading troops into battle. He was more inclined to be like a Larry the Cable Guy type of guy, get her done. That's kind of the way he would do it. He would say, you know what, I'm not much into strategy, but I'm definitely into action. I'm not much into strategy, but I'm definitely into action. I'm dedicated to God. I know God has promised me this property. I am going to go in and take it. That's the way he was. He was just grab a hold. And to be honest, an 85-year-old trying to do that, receiving a promise when he was 40, I'll tell you what, physically, he probably wasn't quite capable of doing what he always thought he could. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us, right? We think, I'm just as strong now as I was then. And maybe he really was. I don't know for sure. But I know this, he had sure learned a lot in that period of time when God put him in a holding pattern, didn't he? He was certainly spiritually stronger than what he was in those early days, first coming out of slavery. He was certainly a more mature individual, wasn't he? And knowing what God would want and not want in his life. And so he was certainly ready in other ways through experience with God over the years. And there are some things that I know that I will never do today. There are things that I know you will never do today. If you have a singing voice that should only be heard in the shower, you are not going to be singing at Van Wezel anytime soon unless you work there after hours and start singing on the stage by yourself, okay? It just isn't going to happen. That's the way it is. If you have two left feet, you aren't going to be on Dancing with the Stars anytime soon. If you are not good in math, you are not going to become a nuclear physicist. And if you weigh 120 pounds, you are not going to be playing offensive lineman for the Bucks this fall when they start their season. But it is true that God will be blessing you and has blessed you in other ways that prepare you for the dream, that help you to be able to achieve that. There's something important to realize, and that is God's blessings are always going to harmonize with your gifts. Romans 12:6 says, God has given each of us the ability to do certain things well. Certain things well. And the dream that God places in your heart, he will enable you to do that. Isn't that neat to know? That if you are honoring God with your life, if you are pleasing God with who you are, if you are dedicated to God and you have a godly dream, he is going to help you to accomplish that with the gifting that you have. The third thing is Caleb's dream fit with Israel's need. Caleb's dream fit with Israel's need. One of the first things you notice about Caleb's dream is it's going to benefit the whole nation. He is driving out giants from the land. That's going to help everybody, isn't it? Not just himself, it's going to help everybody. Philippians 2:4 says, don't think only about your own affairs, but be interested in others too. When you're pursuing a dream that will honor God, it's going to bless other people. I was so impressed with something I read this week about something that happened last Sunday in Texas. There was a rival gang, 5 rival gang members, who risked their lives in a Texas prison on last Sunday to be baptized into Christ. Just 6 months after Gateway Church in Dallas opened the campus there in a maximum security unit. Someone had a dream by saying, you know what? What if we opened up a church in a maximum security prison? And so they went to Cofield Prison in Texas. It's a prison that has 4,200 criminal offenders. There are men there who are so dangerous, so violent that they spend 23 hours a day confined to their cells. These guys, Holsinger, who was the Gateway Cofield Prison campus minister, said, these guys cannot be around other people. They cannot be around friends. They cannot be around family. But last Sunday, the prison asked Gateway Church pastors and volunteers if they would baptize several men who had made a decision to follow Christ. And over the next 2 years, this church has a dream to continue planting churches in these prisons who are near their campuses, within 100 miles of existing Gateway campuses. Additionally, there are small groups at every Gateway campus for families of those who are incarcerated. The remaining 14 prisoners in solitary confinement will be baptized in July, and the church is also planning taking several thousand Bibles to supply the prison for individuals and new inmates. Someone had a dream. Someone had a vision that was a God-honoring vision. It never happens that a prison calls up a church and says, "Can you come and baptize some of our people here?" But that is what happened. It's usually the church saying, "Hey, can we come in and baptize someone?" The other way around this time. God was in that dream. God blessed that dream. What is your dream, and what will it do for other people? Not just you. How will it impact the lives of others? It may be something that will impact them for all eternity. And what could it do for others and to others? Caleb's dream was blessed by God because of his character also. Numbers 14:24, there are 3 character traits that God points out about Caleb that are important for you and for me if we're going to see our dream take place as well. The first one is humility. Humility. God called Caleb my servant. The fact that Caleb was called a servant, especially when he was an ambitious individual, is pretty remarkable because ambitious individuals typically are kind of wanting other people to do things for them. They're kind of in charge. But Caleb recognized God's authority in his life and was humble before God. You know what David wrote in Psalm 69, verse 32? He said, "The humble will see their God at work and be glad." James wrote in chapter 4, verse 6, "God sets himself against the proud, but he shows favor to the humble." In 1 Peter 5:6, it says, in a paraphrase, "Humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and in his good time he will honor you." I'll tell you what, it's remarkable that Caleb, in his dream and in his humility, was someone who came before God and said, "God, whatever you want in my life. I can't do this by myself. I need your help." That's humility, isn't it? Saying, "God, I need you." And that's humility for us too, to say, "God, I need you," because so often we feel like we can do it all by ourselves. We have the ability to do it. But we also need to know that God is saying, "Listen, trust me. I will be there for you." Caleb's speaking to Joshua, and he's Joshua's peer, but he's still humble before Joshua as well. He doesn't come in demanding things, and he kind of asks for it, but he doesn't act kind of mean to Joshua. Doesn't sound like he's kind of taking charge at that point. He asks for permission to take the land. And Caleb says, "You yourself heard them, that the Anakites were there, their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out, just as he said." He was humble. A second thing is that he was filled with courage. He had courage. In Numbers 14:24, God also said, "My servant Caleb is different from the others." Did you know that the scriptures tell us that after the report came back from all the spies, 12 spies, 10 were bad, 2 were good, so to speak, those 10 bad spies gave out that bad information to the congregation, to the group that were there, and guess what they wanted to do? A little while ago I said they want to go back to Egypt. They want to get out of there. But there was something else they wanted to do. They wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb because of their report. I'll tell you what, they were brave. They were courageous. They did not back down in their belief that God could be with the people and take them into the promised land. And if you're going to pursue your dream, you're going to need courage, and you also are going to have to know that you will face some opposition along the way. John Gardner wrote, "We are continually faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems." If your dream is going to honor God, you're going to feel some resistance. But remember something that was said in Scripture. If God is for us, who can be against us? If God is for us, who can be against us? Remember, no matter how big that giant is that you're facing, God is even bigger. Giant might be bigger than you, but God is even bigger, and God does not cower before anyone. If you're going to be in God's will, be humble, be courageous, and know that God is standing for you. And then loyalty is another thing that Caleb had. In Numbers 14:24, that same verse, God says, "But my servant Caleb is different from the others. He has remained loyal to me." Caleb didn't demonstrate loyalty per se by being an adventurous spy going into the promised land, even though he certainly was loyal. But loyalty really came shining through his character when the time came when he could have folded, when he could have backed away, when he could have said, well, you're right, hey, we just won't go in there. We'll go back to Egypt. Instead, he stood strong, he and Joshua together stood strong against a whole nation, saying, we can do it. There was loyalty to God right here. Loyalty came into play when they remained loyal, even when the others were wavering and getting cold feet. Each of us have a routine that's kind of daily, right? We're not challenged all that much most of the days of our lives. But the time might come when we're trying to live out our dream, when we're trying to do something where there's a challenge, and that is where our loyalty has to shine through. And that's where, if we are loyal, it will shine through. It will be obvious to those around us that we are taking a stand for God and that we will not compromise our faith. Now, a delay might occur, just like it did for Caleb. Caleb had to wait for a long time to be able to get in there to realize his dream. But God is saying to him, and he may be just saying to you too, I won't forget you, but you'll have to wait a while. You'll have to wait a while. Maybe God is saying, I want you to mature for a while. I want you to do some growing. I want you to develop more patience in your life. I want you to recognize that this delay is ultimately for your benefit. It could be also there's a delay there because God is saying, there's something in your life that is not jiving with where I want you to be right now. Maybe there's some sin involved. Maybe there's something else, some form of disobedience involved in your life. And God says, I'm not going to bless your life until you begin to remove that, until you don't harbor that in your heart anymore. So God may be saying, you have to wait a while until that's all gone. And when you prove to me that you're loyal, when you keep on hanging on tough in those difficult times, then I will bless you. Carl Sandburg, the great poet of yesteryear, wrote, there's an eagle in me that wants to soar. There's a hippopotamus in me that wants to wallow in the mud. It's true for all of us, isn't it? There's an eagle inside that wants to soar. There's a hippopotamus that wants to get in there and just kind of wallow around in that mud. David says in Psalm 66:18, if I had not confessed the sin in my heart, my Lord would not have listened. God may be saying to you and to me, I want to bless you, but if you're hanging on to this thing, it's not going to work. You've got to get rid of that. There's a paraphrase of Matthew 6:33 where it says, God will give you all you need from day to day if you live for him and make the kingdom of God your primary concern. The scriptures tell us that Caleb took the hill country. And in Judges chapter 1, it's pretty cool because it tells us that Caleb already has the land. His family is there. His daughter gets married, and her husband, Othniel, they both agree that they would like to have some of that land. And so his daughter approaches Caleb and says, can we possibly have the land where the springs are? And Caleb says, absolutely. Absolutely. And so when we have a dream that will bless us, it will also bless other people as well. On Thursday, June the 6th, just a few days ago, there was a 75th anniversary and celebration of D-Day. Took place. Most of us probably saw something on television about that or read about it. What a powerful, powerful event it was 75 years ago when Allied forces lined up on beaches, coming on shore in those beaches in France, to be able to take on the Nazi war machine and to be victorious. It was a miraculous thing that took place, and that changed the course of history because of the bravery of those young men going across there. The dream of Dwight Eisenhower and other generals who got together to formulate that plan was something that had to be directed by God. And it was something that had to be executed in such a magnificent way that it couldn't have been victorious if God wasn't on their side. And God wasn't against the Nazis. And so when we take a look at that, it's what a wonderful thing that was. There was sacrificial blood that was shed there on those sands of those beaches because God said freedom is going to occur throughout the world. White crosses are at the cemetery in Normandy that mark the lives of Americans who died there, helping to secure one of the most important victories in history. In 33 AD, another sacrifice took place that changed the world in an even more powerful and better way. A young man gave his life on a wooden cross. He died not for his own sins, but he died for the sins of everybody else. And they buried him, and then on the third day he raised from the dead. After several days he ascended back up into heaven and has promised that he is coming back again someday. There is not a white cross at his grave. Instead, there is an empty tomb, and he is no longer there. In fact, no one is there, because he was raised up and he is victorious over all of life. And he has promised he's coming back not to commemorate his death, but to take us home to heaven to be with him. Talking about Jesus Christ. God sent him so that we might have a right relationship with him. Maybe today there's somebody here who says, you know what? I need to surrender my life to Jesus Christ. I need to give my life to the one who was willing to give his life for me. I need to pay honor to him by surrendering who I am to him. You know, those guys that were baptized at that prison in Texas I mentioned a while ago, you know, they had to go back in and face other guys that were still in gangs. They had to go back and say, you know, I've changed my allegiance. I'm no longer in the gang. I am now in God's group. And I'll tell you what, it's dangerous for those guys. They said that some of them were crying, knowing what they were going to have to face when they went back. But they bravely stepped forward and went into that water and came back out, changed people. Maybe today there's somebody here who is brave enough and has been thinking about it enough and is saying, I'm ready to make that commitment enough. I'm ready to take that step and do the same thing. If that's the case, I'll be back in the back there. You come back, talk to me, and we'll point you in the right direction and help you out, all right? Let's stand together. Let's sing the song of invitation together.